These brakes suck. And I understand why. These are cheap bikes intended for dirt use, but mine is intended for the street now, and with the added power of the far driver, these dinky little mountain bike brakes aren't doing it. Unfortunately, no one makes a big brake kit for these bikes, so I did. I'm gonna get off the floor now. Even with the stock bike, I feel like these brakes just aren't enough. I said as much in my first review of this bike. And now with the power turned up, it's even more noticeable. Oof. It's just not enough pinching power to make me feel confident in these brakes. Thankfully, there are solutions, and interestingly enough, one of those can be found in the far driver. That being energy regen. I can turn on a setting here which actually will reverse the flow of electricity so it goes back into the battery and gives me a little bit more range, which is nice. But it also reduces the speed when you let off the throttle. It's almost like engine braking for those of you familiar with gas-powered motorcycles. And it's really easy to do so in the far driver app, so once you have it on and connected, you just go to the Pro Enable section and then scroll down to energy regenerate. And this is gonna look familiar to what you saw previously in ratios and speed. It's the same set of RPMs and percentages, but this time it's negative percentages rather than positive percentages. And I've been playing around with this for a little bit and have found that I prefer having a higher number with the higher RPM and then taper it down to the lower RPMs, kind of the opposite of what I have above with my ratios and speed. Any other settings like the stop back current and the max back current, I did not change that because I don't want to overload the battery. I don't want to throw too much at it. It's only used to a trickle charge basically, so we don't want to push it any further than that. The only other thing that I need to do for this in order to make sure that I'm using it is to scroll down to the function section here, and then the very last button is follow. Right now I have it disabled, but there are a couple of options here, and in my case I'm going to use number 3, which is the EABS when release throttle. So what that means is that it's going to kick in the energy regen the second I let off this throttle. The other option that's available is number 2, which is when brake valid. What that means is that if you have a brake switch that's actually wired into the far driver, then you can utilize that. Like these brakes here actually do have switches from the factory, but I've removed those and I don't have anything wired into the far driver, so I'm just gonna use the when release throttle. And how about a demonstration? Let's show you first what happens to this when it's free spinning and I let off the throttle with no energy regeneration. And now with energy regen we get. So let's see how effective the energy regen is with a little experiment. So way down there I have a couple of cones. I'm going to accelerate as fast as possible up to top speed, up to those cones, and then I'm just going to let off and not touch the brakes, and then we'll see what happens with this thing with regen on and then with regen off to see if there's any significant difference in stopping distance. We got regen on and letting off. Still pretty long rolling distance, but now I feel it kicking in. All right, I should have taken the cones to the other end. I feel kind of ridiculous just running in a helmet. Yeah, it looks pretty ridiculous. Here we go. That is our first marker. We'll leave that there. All right, so regen has been shut off now. Let's do it again. And off. It's just free spinning, so I feel like it's just friction that's really slowing down. There we go. Still going, still going. And I've turned into someone's birthday party. Okay, that was a little awkward. They're doing like some weird birthday photo shoot thing. A dude's ordering a pizza. I don't know what the hell's going on, but this is my original stopping point with energy regen, and probably like a good at least 80, 90 feet. That's pretty significant, actually. I think we need more though, actual brakes to upgrade. Now you can look up hydraulic mountain bike brakes on Amazon or eBay and find hundreds upon hundreds of listings. Many people have done this and I'm gonna be no different. However, with so many options out there, you have to know which ones to go for. Thankfully, almost all mountain bike brakes have the same bracket and the same spacing, so there's that going for us. But annoyingly, the levers on a bicycle are flipped. The front is actually on the left, where the rear is on the right. Motorcycles, on the other hand, will have the front on the right and the rear on the left, or a clutch lever. That makes finding bicycle brakes for a motorcycle quite difficult, although I suppose you could just buy any bicycle brakes that you find out there. Someone did that for the old Mototec that I bought that was broken and I restored it, and their fix for that was to simply just flip the lever upside down so it's on the appropriate side. I guess that could work for a short time, but these brake levers are designed to have a high spot, so if you have any air bubbles in the line, it goes there. With this lever flipped upside down, there's nowhere for that air bubble to go. It's gonna stay stay in the lines, and that means spongy brakes. All that to say, when you're looking for upgraded brakes, the first thing you should look out for is a set that has a front right and a rear left. Then there's the brake piston. These stock brakes, being what they are, only have one set of pistons, so one point of contact pushing the pads together when you squeeze the lever. Aftermarket brakes will advertise smoother pistons or even bigger pistons with more pressure applied, so the stopping force is greatly improved. Or you could even go up to brakes with 4 pistons total, like these. These have 2 pistons on each side, so it's a greater surface area, and with the same squeeze of the lever, this force is going to be much greater. And these brakes specifically are some branded thing. I actually don't know what the name brand is because it's some generic off-brand. Almost all of them are, but I know it says M4 on the side, and most importantly, these brakes have the correct lever on the correct side, so I will link these ones specifically in the description below. And not only were these on the right side, but they're roughly the right length. Since these are all for mountain bikes, they're mostly going to be intended for something with 26-inch tires, so if anything, these are going to be longer than you actually need them to be. Like according to Mototec's website on this, the front is 760 millimeters long and the rear is 1100 millimeters long. These are 850 millimeters long in the front and 1600 millimeters in the rear, so I have a little bit of slack I'm going to be dealing with. I guess if you really wanted to, you could swap the tubes from the stock ones onto your brand new levers and calipers, but that requires emptying out all of the oil that's inside there and bleeding the entire system, and that requires special tools, so that's going to be a very tedious job. I would probably just stick with the extra slack. So let's get to swapping. I'm going to start with the front here because it's the shortest and it's the easiest. We just have to take off the lever on the top and then the bracket on the bottom and then just reroute the new stuff in the exact same manner that it was previously. Well, that was a pretty easy install. We got it on here and it feels really good, which is really awesome. I'm looking forward to trying this thing out, but a few things that I noticed in the install. First thing is the lever length. This is a lot shorter than the stock levers, which I'm fine with. I like shorty levers. I only use 1 or 2 fingers anyway, so perfect for me. But another thing to do with the lever in the design is that it actually pivots in such a way that you can't put this flush up against the throttle because it sticks out a little bit when it's not depressed. So it's in a little bit of an awkward spot, but again, for me it's fine because I have long fingers and I only use 1 or 2 anyway, so it's going to be fine for me, but just something to look out for if you're getting these. Then the second thing, which is probably most important, and oddly enough, that even though this says it's 850 millimeters long, it's actually shorter than the stock cable. So I don't know if they're measuring from the very tip of this lever all the way down to the caliper or what, but any case, it is actually about ½ inch shorter, give or take, from the stock stuff. And that poses another issue when you unspring the forks. When it's its full length, it's actually binding up a little bit. So because of that, I couldn't use the standard fitting where this is actually clamped onto the fork guard. I had to move it up and drill a couple of holes to the side and zip tie it there. That way it had enough slack, so when this is fully uncompressed, then it's not limited by the cable. And again, I think this is going to be okay in my case because this bike is the Supermoto, and the Supermoto is not going to be on the trails and being jumped often, and with my weight, the sag, it does compress the forks a little bit further than that, so I do have some slack available for me when I'm riding it around. And with the zip tie placement that I added to it, I think it's fine, and now it just barely is a little bit longer than it fully unsprung, so it's not going to be limited by the actual cable. But now onto the rear. And to even get to the rear brake system, you have to basically strip this whole bike down, taking the seat off, the shroud off, the battery out, just so you can make sure that you get to that cable entirely and follow everything along, so you can pull it out and then slap in the new stuff. So now it's really easy to make sure that we can get that whole thing out of there and put the new one in, and hopefully the new one is longer or as long as the stock one is. Well, at least the new stuff for the rear is longer than the stock, so at least they weren't lying on that part. But it looks like I'm running into another problem. The 60 volt actually has the brake rotor on the right here, whereas the 48 volt has it on the left. So you can see where it's supposed to be lined up. Now the mounts are off kilter, and it's because this assumes that it's going to be on the left side. So I'm going to have to stand back and scratch my head on this one a little bit. Well, I found a solution, and it's actually pretty simple, and just flip it upside down. However, the portion that's not so simple is that. So this bracket has a little slot right here, and it's specifically aligned for a bung on the inside of this axle, so it slides only backwards and forwards and will stay in place when you apply the brake or when the wheel is just simply spinning. because you're riding it. Well, it's the next day. I thought about it a little bit further on what to do, and I have fixed everything. So I found a perfectly sized M6 bolt that was laying around that had roughly the same diameter on the outside of the bolt as the welded bung. Then I drilled a hole straight through the axle and threaded it so that way I can screw it into the axle with red Loctite. And since the bolt was long enough to go straight through, I added a nylock washer on the end of it so it's even more secure. I also finished the routing of the line. Thankfully, this one, like I said, was longer than the stock one. What I ended up doing was actually going behind the rear number plate and then across the top of the shock rather than going straight through over the battery box, and it took up that slack perfectly. All right, now time to test this thing out, and mostly to check to see that all the bolts are tight. These are new pads though, so I have to seat them in just a little bit. So we're gonna do some slow speeds and then just gradual squeeze of the brakes. All right, I think they're seated in enough. Now time for the ultimate test, full brake. Ooh, a little squirrely. Now it's a true Supermoto. It's got that little chirp from the rear skidding just a little bit when you take it into a corner too hot. But we're not done yet. It's not a true Supermoto until we take it one step further with one big rotor. With higher stopping forces needed than a dirt bike, Supermotos will compensate with a larger rotor in the front. Having a larger rotor makes the braking point further away from the center. Compare a point towards the center with one on the outer edge. They both make a complete circle in the same amount of time, right? But a point on the outer edge has to make a bigger circle at the same time, so it goes faster. But being further away, it also has more leverage. So the braking force is more effective further away than somewhere else in the middle, even though both points have to make the same revolution per minute. Isn't that cool? But unfortunately, no one makes a big rotor for the Mototec, and I thought I would try some other things like maybe the 72 volt from Mototec, whether or not that one fits, but it doesn't. Then I thought I would go to Electro & Co.'s RTR, because that one has a big rotor kit, but that one doesn't fit either. So I just settled on making one myself. Mototec has the bolt hole dimensions on the website, so I took those and made my own. And this is the result. It's a simple design, but then again, I use Simple Design software to make it. It's laser cut out of 1.9mm stainless steel, so it's not gonna go rusting on me. I might make a second version in the future with slots so it cools it down better, but right now it has the maximum surface area for those pads to squeeze and do their thing. But we can't just swap this thing out and go. We need to move the brake caliper back, and I think I can get away with some longer bolts and some spacers. And here's what this thing looks like after some general hackery and half-assery. The tricky part here is alignment and spacing those bolts out enough. The top bolt needed to be spaced out a lot more than the bottom one. I think it ultimately was 12.5mm on the top and 10 on the bottom, and you can see my half-assery at play because not only did I use stacked washers to do so, but you see that copper part? That's a battery ring terminal. Don't worry though, this is strictly temporary. I just wanted to put something in there so I knew exactly how long each of those bolts needed to be, and since then I have ordered legitimate M6 spacers. I'm pretty proud of this. It looks awesome, and we'll see how effective it is in a little bit. But first, I'd really appreciate it if you like and share this video. I know there's a lot of bike channels out there, and particularly electric dirt bike channels, but I like to think that the underlying theme of this channel is that we have a DIY aspect where we find cheap, effective modifications and things with a little bit of creativity where we're using parts that are not necessarily made for the bike that we're working on. I mean, this bike is a prime example of that, and I have a lot more on this to share with you. All that to say, thanks. But enough of that, let's get to testing. So 3, 2, 1, brake. Whoa. That was all 100% front brake. I didn't use any rear brake there. I guess the one downside is it emphasizes just how soft and spongy the forks are. And I even did the $8 fork mod on this, and it's still too soft. It just dips the second I tap the brake. Look at that. That's immediate. But I love how responsive it is. It is just so good. Oh my God, look at that. I don't know how many people watching want to go full big brake kit like this, but at the very least, just replacing the levers and replacing the calipers did a lot. Like, these 4-piston brakes feel so good, just solid enough. And I know no one makes this big brake rotor. I made it myself, but if there's enough people interested, maybe I'll make some more. If you're genuinely interested in this rotor, shoot me an email, reach out to me, and we can see about getting a group order together. I think if we get enough, if we get like 10 or more people interested in this thing, then I can make a bulk order and we can start selling these bad boys. I'm almost having too much fun slamming these brakes. I'm gonna wear the pads out.